Good afternoon. This is Clark Neighbors with BIS Commodities in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, with the market summary for the week ending June 23rd, 2017. Very negative, very heavy market this week in the grains. Just to kind of give you a rough idea, July corn and December corn both down about 25 cents on the week. And keep in mind, 2 weeks ago today, the market was well over $4 in December corn. The beans are down roughly 32 to 35 for the week. At same point, wheat, which seems to be the most stable of the three grain markets right now, only off a nickel. I think the general consensus is the clock is beginning to tick as far as crops, weather, and so on. And as we know, we get to the latter part of June, the early part of July, history says the market, unless you have some weather issues, the market tends to start to slip. Now, you could argue this year seems a little earlier than normal, and that could be the case depending on weather going forward. But keep in mind, once you get by 4th of July or maybe the 10th of July, and if there's not some weather issues on the horizon or some real big questions or concerns going forward on questions about yields and that type of thing, it's going to be a lot more difficult from that time going forward. So there's still this proverbial window ahead of us where the market can change gears and maybe get a little better, but we'll see. If anybody knows the weather, then that would be the answer. But again, the clock is ticking, but we'll see how this window plays out here over the next few weeks. Now keep in mind, looking back on the grains, pretty heavy week, as I mentioned earlier. Corn is at the lowest levels we've seen since last September, actually the September 30th crop report. Beans on a continuation basis, old crop going back to April of 2016, and as far as the new crop soybean, lowest value since last August. So not historically low levels, but testing some recent pressure, especially in the corn market where it's been very, very range bound since last harvest. We're definitely testing the bottom end of that range. As I mentioned earlier, corn at its lowest level since September 30th. Keep in mind, next Friday, June 30th, is the grain stocks and planted acreage report. That can have some pretty heavy barometers on this market going forward, depending on acres and so on going forward. Keep in mind that report comes out on a Friday, the 30th. July 3rd is a Monday. The 4th is the following Tuesday, which would be a holiday. So once that report's out, we can only trade that report part of the market Friday and then Monday, and then you're off again until that following Wednesday. So, plenty of time for changes in weather, et cetera, et cetera. So there'll be potential volatility in that time. We'll see. Commitment to traders report. A week ago we were mentioning how the funds liquidated basically their entire short position on corn. The market barely moved higher. Now this week they did build the stocks, the shorts in corn. As of Tuesday, short 53,000 contracts. Some people feel now, as of Friday, that number could be pushing 100,000 contracts. Wheat, short 20,000 contracts, and beans, short 87,000 contracts. All of those would have grown with short positions here since Tuesday. You can determine what that number may be. This afternoon we also had a cattle on feed report, which from a demand perspective on grains would be a positive. As far as livestock, probably a little negative. Cattle on feed came in at 103%, placements at 112%, and marketing at 109. All those numbers are slightly bigger than what the trade was looking for. The break in the cattle market over the last 2 weeks is one of the biggest 2-week breaks we've seen in the history of the cattle trade. This went from basically $136 to $122. It's down roughly 11% in the last 2 weeks. That looks to be the 6th largest 2-week break in cattle market history. Yet most of those other 2-week breaks were back in 2004, right after the mad cow scenario. So obviously a big correction in the cash cattle trade. So again, next week we have a report on Friday, the the planted acreage and stocks report. Keep in mind also there's deliveries on July futures, which would start also next Friday. The one last thing we'd mention is there's a lot of unpriced corn, old crop corn in the country. There's also a fair amount of corn that's unpriced via basis contracts and some other avenues, and I think that's something to keep in mind going forward. Is a lot of this old crop corn is going to be looking for a home. Now movement has slowed down immensely in the last week and a half. Basis has perked back up some since that happened, but most end users know there's a lot of bushels in the country to move eventually, and that can still have some impact on this basis, at least through the balance of the old crop. If you have any questions on any of these markets, feel free to call us at BIS Commodities. Phone number is 800-373-2525, or catch us on the web, biscommodities.com, and also on Twitter. With that, we hope everyone has a very nice weekend, and we'll see you next week.